Matt. In this week's episode of This Week in MMA, if you're new to the channel, we are going to get into it. We've got round number one with the fan question of the week. We're going to get into the Twitter purge. We're also going to preview and predict some of the biggest fights from this week. So Matt, without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, and welcome to another episode of This Week in MMA. And listen, the subscriber base here has jumped over the past 3 weeks, and we really want to thank everyone for joining us. And we're going to get back to our roots here in This Week in MMA. So this is a weekly podcast that we've been doing since early 2019. We took a bit of a hiatus with all of these 2-minute breakdowns. It's been the cat's meow to do these videos. We really do enjoy them. Don't forget to check out our 2-minute breakdowns for UFC Tampa. They're going to be up here on the YouTube channel Wednesday night. So don't forget about those. We're going to preview all of the big fights. We're also going to preview one of the fights from the prelims that we're really looking forward to. But Matt, before we get into kind of an overview and a synopsis of what the show's about, I think you've got something to tell the viewers, and one viewer out there in particular.
Lorenz Larkin, you may have watched our 2-minute breakdown in which we called you extremely inconsistent and you're definitely going to lose this fight. Now, I would like to personally address you. I'm speaking to you, Lorenz Larkin, de Monsoon. I would like to apologize. The things I said were not only rude, but also incorrect. You did, in fact, beat Andrei Koreshkov in one of the more entertaining fights in the past few months. So I would just like to personally send an apology your way. Hopefully, you enjoy the content, though. Like many have in recent weeks, the channel is starting to grow. And that's pretty much it. Sorry, Lorenz. You're a great fighter. Please don't hurt us.
All right, so that was pretty good of you. Last weekend, we previewed Bellator 229. We also previewed the big UFC card, 243. And what Matt's referring to is, our 2-minute prediction for Koreshkov-Larkin in the main event, possible title implications there. Lorenz Larkin cruised his way to a decent decision win. There's a chance he fights for the title. Maybe the winner of Lima McDonald, maybe the loser there. Could also try and rematch with Paul Daly, who has to get through Sabah Humasi coming up later on this year. So all sorts of different options for Lorenz Larkin there. Glad we got that out of the way from the start. So if you're new to the program, we've got some different segments that you won't see on any other MMA show that's out there. So yeah, you might see some shows with fan questions, but we do a deep dive in round number one. It's the first part of the show. So what we do is we ask fans like you out there at home to submit video questions. So you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Craig Allen FNP, at Matt Allen FNP. You can send them as a DM, as a private message. You can go out there and blast it to the world if you want to on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, whatever. Let us know a question that you'd like us to answer in detail. When I mean in detail, we're going to spend 15 to 20 minutes focusing on this one topic. So some of the things that we've done before, we had a question from at Trademark MMA, Max Friedman, one of the good minds out there in MMA. His question was, who are some of the prospects from the seasons of Dana White's Contender Series that you can see breaking through? So what did we do? We picked every single prospect that we could see making an impact from Dana White's Contender Series out of the 3 seasons. Yep. You know, you got your Johnny Walkers, your Jeff Neals, your Sean O'Malley's. There's all sorts of great fighters from those seasons. We've also had questions where, who would you think would win a heavyweight Grand Prix? So how do you kind of answer that question? Is it an all-time type of question? Is it a right-now type of question? So we went with a fantasy football type of approach, broke it down in a Sweet 16 type of bracket, and ended up picking a winner out of that. So some neat stuff here, and we do have round number one from this week. Our own SM Cornerman on Twitter, John Franklin, who co-hosts the show Early Stoppage with me on the Loudmouth MMA Podcast Network, has asked us a question, so we will break that one down. The next segment of the show is the Twitter Purge. Matt, what can you tell us about the Twitter Purge?
So the Twitter Purge is basically we go through Twitter, and anything topical or fun or just really anything that's happened in the world of MMA that's on Twitter, we go through, we break it down, we talk about it.
Sometimes it can get a little dicey, and we've got a few topics for this week that we will dive into that are a little bit dicey, and sometimes that's what happens, so we will get into those after round number one, and then at the end of the show, we kind of get on our bicycle and try and help ourselves out, and we get through some of those predictions that maybe we don't get a chance to get into on the main card previews. I mean, there's only so much time in a day. Exactly. I can only do so many of these 2-minute prediction videos. I mean, a couple weeks ago we did 19, so they get pretty hairy, and sometimes you miss some of the prelims, but also this weekend. I mean, this week, rather. There's TKO 49 in Quebec. There's PFL 7. There's Fight Nights Global 94. One championship has 2 cards. Saturday night, Sunday. You got Bellator 230, and you've got UFC Tampa. So there's all sorts of MMA. We're going to kind of pick and choose at the end of the show some of those fights that you should be watching. And you know what? That kind of brings us right into round number 1, because I think you're really going to enjoy the question, Matt. Let's hear from John Franklin.
Hey guys, this is John from Phoenix. First time, long time. My question is, who of the prospects or guys fairly early in their careers do you see having that sort of championship pedigree? Is there anybody from the Contender Series? Or is there anybody that is really early on in their career, maybe sub 10 wins at this point, who you think could make a championship run before it's all said and done? All right, guys, huge fan. Talk to you later.
All right, Matt. There's a lot of different ways that we could really look at this question. We really want to thank him. And if you want to try and follow John on Twitter, it's at SMCornerman on Twitter. He hosts the Loudmouth Recap Show on the network of podcasts, as well as Early Stoppage with me on Thursday nights. Episodes typically come out on Friday. So his question is, who are some of these fighters that we could see break through and have a really good shot at winning a title? Now, Matt, like I said from the start, we could break this one down in all sorts of different ways. I mean, is it a UFC fighter? Are these fighters in other organizations that could come to a bigger organization, have an impact? How are you kind of looking at this question?
So we kind of took fighters who, and I know in the question he asked us to, find fighters that are under 10 wins, but it's really hard to predict just kind of what the ceiling is of those fighters. They don't have over 10 wins. So we picked people around 10 wins. We were a little lenient with a few of these picks. But yeah, just anyone kind of on the up and up who's not really in the top 15. Again, in flyweight, it's kind of hard because they only have 15 fighters in the division. But yeah, just anyone who we can see in the future possibly fight for a title, contend for a title. Not all of these, of course, are going to happen, but just anyone with the highest likelihood.
And there's a lot of decent picks. So what we did, we went through some of the men's divisions. We'll bring up a few of the women's divisions because you see new talent come in and out all the time. But some of the divisions, like you said, with men's flyweight, you don't have a lot of depth. With women's featherweight, you don't have a lot of depth. There's not a lot of movers and shakers. And a lot of fighters, too, whether it's men's or women's divisions, you see somebody pop in that has 20 wins and they go on and deliver. You see it in Bellator all the time with a Juan Archuleta taking on a guy like Patricio Pitbull. Yeah, he didn't get the win, but he had a ton of experience going into it. So our first fighter that you can see up on the screen, if we start with men's flyweight, a guy like Matt Schnell, and listen, he's 29 years old, he's 14-4, but this is a guy all of a sudden that's kind of breathing new life and fresh air into a division that was a little bit stagnant. You had Demetrius Johnson pretty much champ forever, and then it started dying off. I mean, what can you tell us about a guy with the nicest mane of chest hair?
It's a beautiful thing to watch. He's one of the better prospects in the division, as we see right here. He beat guys like Luis Smolka, Jordan Espino. Now, the problem with him, though, is the few times where he has kind of fought the upper echelon, he fought Rob Font at bantamweight, of course. Rob Font's a monster at bantamweight. And then Hector Sandoval, a lot of people kind of forget who he is. He's built like Yoel Romero, but he's a 125er. And that, listen, losses happen. But yeah, like you said, as of late, he's really started to put it together now. He's fighting Alejandro Pantoja in his next fight, and that's a very tough fight. Hopefully he can kind of, jump over the hump in that division. So yeah, he's just one of the guys you really have to watch out for in that flyweight division.
And yeah, there's a lot of movers and shakers at flyweight. I mean, of course, Kai Kara-France is one of those guys that you definitely have to watch out for. And there are plenty others, but at 125, I realistically think the way that Matt Schnell carries himself, presents himself in interviews, he does a really good job. He speaks very well. He does. Articulate, and this is especially one of those guys at 125 that you want to have pushing your division. Another one of those fighters that, we don't have him up here, but a guy in Askar Askarov. And yeah, he had a great fight with Brandon Moreno.
Definitely lost it, though.
Either one of these guys could really make a push at 125, but for me, it was Askarov coming in as an undefeated fighter from ACB. He had a long layoff, and he performed quite well against the Brandon Moreno.
Great fighter.
And he was already battle-tested in the UFC, so those are, a couple of people at 125 in the men's divisions that we really believe in. Now, if we move over to 135, there's all sorts of different fighters that we could bring up. The first one that we went with was Jack Shore, and yes, he just made his debut in the UFC fairly recently. This is a guy that was a champion over in Cage Warriors that automatically comes in against the guy Noeline Hernandez. And Matt, I know you were pretty high on Noeline Hernandez coming into that fight. He had a good fight against Marlon Chito Vera before that. Unfortunately, a loss for Hernandez there, but more unfortunately, a really tough loss to Jack Shore in that fight that they just had.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. At 24 years of age, every single fight, Jack Shore is going to show you kind of a new wrinkle in his game. And he's a phenomenal grappler, and most of his wins are by stoppage. So he has a very fun fighting style. He's got really good cardio, a phenomenal grappling. If he takes your back, it's completely over. I mean, as you can see, his last 2 wins by rear naked choke. But he's a guy you really have to watch out for. And it's going to take him a few fights to kind of get into that top 15. But again, he's only 24. That's what you have to do with a prospect. Keep on giving him fights that are going to challenge different areas of his game. And then eventually he's going to break through. And with his set of skills, I mean, he's going to be a problem for a lot of guys in the bantamweight division.
Yeah, I mean, his grappling and wrestling abilities paired with his, ability to parry on the feet. I mean, he's one of those guys that realistically at 24 and he's undefeated. You know what? A loss in his career is probably going to, teach him some more things and maybe even some of these short-term wins. So I'm really looking forward to Jack Shore moving forward. He's got a great camp. And it's good to see some of these Welsh fighters break through. Of course, we did see it on this Copenhagen card. John Phillips finally kind of living up to that brawler status and getting a crazy win. So good for Jack Shore, good for John Phillips, but really look forward for Jack Shore at 135 to make an impact. If we continue on, 135, we have quite a list here. Merab Dvalishvili is one of those guys that we throw on that list. And yeah, his record's a little salty, but man, he's so much fun to watch.
Well, I mean, when you look at just the Brad Katona fight, because that was one of those fights where you have 2 of the brighter prospects in the division, it was kind of one of those things where, okay, who's going to break through and become, not really contender, because it is quite early in both guys' career, but who is, the top tier of the prospects. And I mean, Dvalishvili went out there and kind of Khabib'd him. Like, he went out, just take down, let you get back up, take you down again, get into mount, beat you up. It was a really impressive performance. And it's performances like that against, higher level prospects, because that's the thing. Guys can come into the UFC and they can be, 10-0, 12-0. But when you actually look at the level of competition, who they fought, a lot of the guys, they had negative records. They weren't very experienced. But a guy like Merab Dvalishvili, even though his record's 9-4, when you look at the guys who he's fought, they've all helped him kind of become a better fighter. And his record's extremely deceiving.
Exactly. And if we continue to move along and we go the Bellator route, a guy in Patrick Mix, this is somebody that a lot of people were calling for the UFC to sign. I mean, guys like Nolan Cain, a bright MMA mind like Nolan, if he says it, he's probably right. I mean, Patrick Mix is 11-0. He comes over from King of the Cage into Bellator and just knocks the socks off of Ricky Bandejas. I mean, this guy looks super, super legit in a division in Bellator that's very stagnant. I mean, you have to think back. Let's go back about a year and a bit. You have to think at that point your champion's Darren Caldwell. He's absolutely mopping the floor with everybody. He has to move up to 145 to take on Noad Lahat simply due to the fact that he couldn't get enough fights at 135. I mean, what was he going to do? Fight Leandro Higo 5 or 6 times? Fight Eduardo Dantas 5 or 6 times? So realistically, Patrick Mix comes in and just blows the doors off. And this is a guy that at 35, I mean, what do you have? You get Darren Caldwell and you got Horiguchi as your champ. How often are you going to see Horiguchi fighting for Bellator and defending that strap? Patrick Mix, to me, is a legit title contender right now.
And that's the thing, even going off just his last win against Ricky Bandejas, and that's another guy who could have easily made this list. Bandejas was coming off that crazy, sweet chin music of Gallagher, and everyone was really high on him. But, Patrick Mix came in, completely halted that, and, really picked up a lot of steam for himself and his own hype. So.
And you look at Patrick Mix too, and I mean, wins over Andre Ewell, wins over Tony Gravely.
Exactly.
These are UFC caliber guys, even Gravely as well. I mean, great wins by Mix, and he's one of those guys that, like we said, enters the title picture automatically. So definitely one of the fighters you have to watch. Yeah, it's not under 10 wins, but still, it's pretty darn close. So that rounds out bantamweight for us. And if we move forward to 145, Matt, there's so many.
There's a ton of fighters that we could have picked for this, but we ended up going with Adam Boric. If you look, he's never lost a Muay Thai fight, an amateur MMA fight, or a professional MMA fight. He knocked out Aaron Pico and Pat Curran both with flying knees. That's absurd.
Oh, in back-to-back fights. And even before that, taking on a guy in Jose Naldo Silva, that was a guy that was legit. A lot of wins, a lot of time in World Series of fighting. You go down through his record, I mean, yeah, you might not recognize a lot of those names. Yeah, Anthony Pretty Boy Taylor, I mean, not a ton of professional experience, but Adam Boric is one of those guys that's absolutely legit. A threat, especially in this featherweight Grand Prix in Bellator. And yeah, you could have thrown down an AJ McKee, relatively similar record, but Boric is one of those guys that they coddled him a little bit, but in his fights in Bellator, all 5 of them by finish and 3 of 5 by flying knee. His Muay Thai skills are almost unparalleled, and his ground game, people will be critical of it, But he's been taken down before in the Pico fight.
He's good at getting back up.
Yeah, I expected him to really struggle. A lot of people did. In the Kern fight, too, I mean, you're taking on a battle-tested veteran, a former champion, Pat Kern. Ran through him. So
it wasn't competitive in the least bit.
Adam Borch, I know he's got, some tough things coming up.
He's got Darrion Caldwell next, which is a tough matchup for him. But if you can halt the wrestling of Aaron Pico and knock him out, and I know Aaron Pico, a lot of people are critical of him, he gets knocked out. But like Aaron Pico skill-wise is kind of similar to Darrion Caldwell. He has a way worse chin, but like wrestling credential-wise, he's just as good. So if Adam Borch can defend those takedowns, get back up to his feet, he's going to be able to. Most likely, he'll be able to light Darrion Caldwell up on the feet if he can keep it there.
And one other name that's on our list, and yeah, it's a prospect that a lot of people are going to know about. He's fighting this weekend. We profiled him in the 2-minute prediction, so I'll link it right here. But Chrome Gracie's only 5-0, and he's taken on a tough test in Cub Swanson. This is a guy that's 25-11, and he's 35 years old. You don't often see 5-0 unless it's a super, super mismatch on a Bellator prelim. Yeah, you don't ever see fights like that in the UFC, so it's kind of a surprising one. But Chrome Gracie looks legit. He's not like an AJ Agazarm that goes out there and loses his debut, or an Aaron Pico.
No.
But Chrome Gracie's one of those guys
he kind of
definitely have to watch.
Well, and a fighter that we're going to talk about soon. He kind of took the Gary Tonin approach where it's, okay, I'm so good at jiu-jitsu, let's kind of round out my other skills, and then let's go into MMA. Let's not jump right into it.
So, moving on over to lightweight, you talk about a guy in Gary Tonin coming
friend of the show.
Out of Team Renzo Gracie, Evolve MMA. Team Renzo Gracie, if you look at it, you've got the Danaher Death Squad in the gym, so it's kind of a decent route to go. But you look at a guy in Gary Tonin, I mean, his striking is damn good. And it's not just good for one championship. No. His striking's really, really good.
Exactly. And like I just said, he waited until he kind of rounded out all of his other skills. He didn't just go into MMA knowing, okay, I have this one thing that's so much better than everyone else. Let's rely on that heavily. He's great on the feet. He has really good wrestling. And of course, once the fight hits the ground, I mean...
And by Matt saying he's great on the feet, it's not to say that he's good at striking, he can pick his shots, he can. His footwork's really
good. Even though he has that world-class jiu-jitsu background, if you didn't know about it, you would think, oh, he was a good boxer, he was a good Muay Thai fighter. Like, he does look like a perfect mixed martial artist.
And he's one of those fighters, and of course, you do see it more in MMA, and we're very critical of boxers, because you don't see a lot of boxers that are ambidextrous, or that can switch stances all the time. But a guy in Gary Tonin that can throw head kicks from either side, that can strike, he'll go body head, he'll parry everything together. And oh, by the way, Super ADCC champ, a guy who took on one of the toughest guys in jiu-jitsu, and Rusmar Palhares. You know him.
Draw.
That's not 155 pounds at all. And you look at his last few fights, and the Song Jun Lee fight was a fight that a lot of people were excited about. He got the guillotine in the second round. Took on Anthony Anglin, who's a power puncher and a guy you really have to worry about. And he just kind of had fun with him on the feet, ends up getting the knockout, and then he gets that crazy heel hook finish in his last fight. Gary Tonin,
he's legit.
This is one of those guys, and it's not just because he's been on the show a number of times, and we do talk about him quite a bit.
But we're not even the only people saying this. Like, he's been on Joe Rogan, for F's sakes. Like, he's one of the biggest prospects in the world, and exactly, he doesn't really have a weakness in his game.
Yeah, 100%. And another guy at lightweight that we were kind of talking about, a guy from ACA that I don't spend as much time on. When I first got into doing this, professionally, started up last spring, and I was so hard on ACB, and not hard on them in a bad way. I really enjoyed it. Production value was good. Became acquainted with Jeff Houston, ring announcer. It was a lot of fun to watch those shows. And yeah, for me, from a personal stance, it's been a little tough to watch the WFCA ACB merger into ACA. Kind of don't support them as much.
Not at all.
Yusuf Raizov is a guy that you should watch, a guy that's been a champion in the past. He's got a great record. If I'm not mistaken, 14 or 15-1 at this point. A little differing in the records between the sites. But he's one of those guys that if he ever breaks away from the promotion, he could have an immediate impact, whether it's with UFC or with Bellator. This is a guy that can finish fights, and he's young in his career. He's only 24 years old. He's got a lot of professional experience. One of those guys that you should go watch. If you can seek it out, his fight against Murat Belayev was really good. So go out there, try and watch some Yusuf Raizov fights. He's one of those guys that, he's got way more fights than under 10, but one of those fighters that you should definitely watch. So that kind of rounds out our 155. And for 170, the way that we looked at it, there's some decent prospects in the UFC, But we're going to go straight Bellator for
We are.
170.
Fight
Night Picks is brought to you by Strikeforce Energy. Head on over to the website, strikeforceenergy.com. If you enjoy the flavor of freedom, the company's veteran-owned and everything's made in America. They've got great apparel. You can turn any 16.9-ounce beverage into an energy drink. There's no sugar, no calories, no stirring, or no shaking required. They also have a line of different products as well as Strikeforce coffee. So if I head into my cart, I've got a 4-count sample pack. I've got a 20-ounce coffee mug. And if I head into that checkout, use the promo code FNP, click to apply, and you're going to save 20% off any order. That's FNP at strikeforceenergy.com. So it's brought to you by Spretzbox. Head on over to the website, spretzbox.com. All you have to do, click to get started. You can either order one of their boxes that has over $100 in value, or maybe you're interested in a single item, like these great socks. So click on them, add them to your cart, head on over to the checkout, and then all you have to do is enter in the promo code FNP as follows here. You'll save 10% off your first box or your complete first order. That's spretzbox.com. Bring up our first fighter. I've heard it on different podcasts lately.
You're going to hear it from me in about 30 seconds.
We've talked about it behind the camera. You don't see a lot of fighters like Logan Storley come up through, find success, and are, they're not really marketed. Logan Storley's one of those lay and pray type wrestlers. He has the credentials. We've had him on the show before. Yeah. But he's one of those guys that it's a fairly boring style. I mean, you look at his record, the win over AJ Matthews, it says TKO elbows and punches. It's just from the ground and pound.
Yeah, it was just more like all of his TKOs are more just from the guy can't get up due to his wrestling, and he lands some shots. None of them. It's not like Khabib ground and pound where he's going to get you down, throw massive power shots and make you give up.
It's a classic wrestler approach where he'll get into half guard and then just hold you down, continue to hold you, land shots, switch positions. You'd see it with a guy like Jake Shields where he'd go half guard on one side, full guard, half guard.
At least Jake Shields could submit people though.
He continued to switch around, but Logan Storley is a decent prospect. I know he's 10-0. He's 27 years old, training out of Hard Knocks 365, so you get some of the best training partners in the world, and he's one of those guys that can continue to gain. I just wish they'd have him fight more often. I mean, You look at it, twice in 2018, one time in 2019. It's really tough to see a guy like this. You want to see him progress, but you don't get to see him enough through Bellator, so he'd be one of those guys that I'd like to see, but one of those wrestlers that he's not a lay and pray type of guy. He's a super prospect that unfortunately fought on the post limbs last weekend for Bellator is Joey Davis.
He's so good.
This guy's so damn good. I mean, Matt, I know the record kind of says it all, but what can you tell us about him? I mean, he's electric.
He really, and that's the best way of describing it. Like, if you like excitement, watch old Black Ice, because he's going to put somebody to sleep for you. Like we see, in his last fight, it was by flying knee. And for some reason, flying knees seem way more relevant in today's MMA than ever before. Especially in Bellator, you got guys like Tyron Claxton, Joey Davis. He can kind of do everything, like you said. The wrestling is so much of a threat that he can really let his hands go and really his stand-up go because he's not worried about getting taken down himself.
Oh, and there's an association with Team Body Shop. All right, kind of like an Aaron Pico, but a little bit more technical, and he's not going to leave his head out there. Exactly. And yeah, maybe not some of the highest of level competition. And listen, I caught some heat here on YouTube for picking ones and zeros in binary for Marco Madsen's performances before he took on Danilo Belluardo here in Copenhagen. But listen, Joey Davis, they're doing the smart thing with him. They're bringing him up slowly. They're letting him accrue some highlight reel knockouts. And the kid's a stud and somebody that you should definitely watch. And if we continue along with 170, you've got Storley, you've got Joey Davis. We wrote down a couple other names in Naaman Gracie and Ed Ruth. And yeah, these are guys that fought each other in the welterweight Grand Prix, so a lot of people are going to know them, but they're still young in their MMA careers. I mean, I understand Naaman Gracie became an MMA fighter in WSOF. He has, he's put more time in, but Ed Ruth, man, one of the most decorated collegiate wrestlers of all time at Penn State. Both of these guys have high ceilings. Of course, we saw Gracie fight a decent fight against Rory McDonald.
Yeah, and that's the thing. A guy like Naaman Gracie, he's kind of, it's almost cheating still have him as a prospect because he's a prospect who's so good that he's also kind of a contender at the same time. And Ed Ruth as well. I know Ed Ruth did lose to Gracie, but that just shows you how good the 170 division is in Bellator. Bellator can kind of get away with something that the UFC can't. Bellator can have 0-0 fighters, 0-1 fighters, 1-1 fighters, so they can sign anyone who has any potential, and they kind of build them up from nothing. And that's why, we look to Bellator for a lot of these higher level prospects.
Yeah, like the Ed Roos, the Joey Davis, the Tyron Claxton, really good people to draw from. Tyrell and Tyree Fortune are
Exactly.
decent wrestlers that we actually don't even have on this list, and I wish we could see Tyree fight more often,
So do
but
I.
Tyrell's just picking up the slack and continues to fight quite often. So that's our 170. If we move up to 185, there's a lot of really decent fighters on here. We've got 3 big ones that we decided to profile, and 2 of them that we're going to pull up on the screen. But kind of an honorable mention, and a guy that's actually ranked right now. So that's kind of why he is an honorable mention. He's not super under the radar. Edmund Shabazian. This is a guy that when I heard he was coming into the UFC, and I heard the affiliation with
Head movement.
Edmund Tarverdyan and Ronda Rousey. This was Ronda Rousey's first big prospect that she was technically the head coach of. I thought, oh boy, this guy's not going to be very good.
He did terrible in his first fight.
And he did terrible against Darren the Dentist
Darren
Stewart.
won.
Yeah, so did I. But Edmund Shabazian, fight over fight, he continues to look really good and keep that prospect status.
And that was the thing. In his first UFC fight, it was very much, oh, I'm a really good wrestler, let's just wrestle. And he didn't really have the finishing ability to go along with it. But as he's kind of evolved as an MMA fighter, he started to kind of put the jiu-jitsu and the wrestling together. And we see once he gets guys down, he's going to strangle you. We saw that in his last fight with Jack Marshman. And I know what you can say, well, Jack Marshman's not the cream of the crop. And he certainly isn't. But he's a very good measuring stick for, kind of an up-and-coming fighter. He's going to pose them a lot of different, challenges. And Edmund Shabazian passed with flying colors.
Exactly. And if we continue along, and now we'll go with one fighter that's in the UFC and then one fighter that's yet to make their UFC debut. This is a fighter that we gushed about getting ready.
We did.
So we talked about in his last fight, Rodolfo Vieira. He was coming into the UFC. Yes, he's 30 years old. At the time, he was 5-0. Had a crazy, crazy submission win over Vitaly Nemchinov, and it was awesome. He was coming over from ACB/ACA, which I already talked about a little bit before, but Oscar Piota, a guy that was liable to get submitted, and in that fight, Vieira looked awesome.
Dope
and
nickname.
Listen, he's the 2015 ADCC openweight champion. Yeah. This guy's jiu-jitsu is on another level, but the thing that does it for him is his striking's pretty good. His takedowns are great.
Exactly. And we see that's kind of the issue that a lot of strictly jiu-jitsu guys have coming into the UFC where, okay, if I get you to the ground, it's over. But how am I going to get you there in the first place? And we've seen guys like Gilbert Burns, guys like Jacques Ray, who have really worked on their wrestling so that they can actually get you down to their best positions. But with Vieira, we saw that he's just kind of the perfect template for a fighter who's so good at jiu-jitsu like he is.
Yeah, so Vieira's the guy, and then a guy that's set to make his UFC debut, and maybe you haven't heard of him if you're not a big fan of Fight Nights Global, Roman Kopylov. Roman Kopylov's 8-0. His first fight as a pro mixed martial artist was a win by decision. That's 7 straight knockouts. And we went back and watched his last fight against Yasube Enomoto. Matt, what can you tell us about that fight?
He carries power deep into a fight, especially like you see there in the 4th round. He was winning the whole fight, hurt him with a jab, hurt him with the right hand, and then all of a sudden switched stances, hit him with the left hand to the body, a left straight, and won by knockout. It was extremely impressive. And that's the thing, when you look at guys coming from other organizations, it's not always just that they win, it's how they win. And you can't really win more impressively than he does.
No, and it's kind of interesting. You look at his record right there. I mean, a couple fights that ended by corner stoppage with Mark Goddard as the referee.
But back kick to the
listen,
bottom.
Roman Kopylov's one of those guys that carries tons and tons of power. He's still young at 28. He's 8-0, so this guy counts as one of those blue chip prospects. So this counts. And if John Franklin, SM Cornerman's paying attention, this is a guy for you. And the reason why we wanted to spend quite a bit of time on him, he's going to make his UFC debut coming up very shortly against Carl Roberson.
Not an easy fight.
That's a really tough one. I mean, we've seen Roberson featured in prelim featured fights.
We fought Glover Teixeira.
We've seen him fight on, if I'm not mistaken, pay-per-view main cards as well. So Roman Kopylov, I think he's got a damn good shot in that fight. I'd like to see the odds on it. You can see it on screen.
It's perfect matchmaking, though, for an up-and-coming prospect's first fight in the UFC.
Yeah, and oh, by the way, it's going to be in Moscow, Russia, so he's going to be fighting at home, too.
Yeah.
Good fight for Roman Kopylov, and a guy that you should definitely watch. So that kind of rounds out 185. For 205 and 265, it's a little difficult because for 205, we've seen a lot of movers and shakers, specifically in the UFC. But if we take a step back, and this one's a really tough one. This is one of those ones where, is he a prospect? Isn't he a prospect? But I wanted to throw him on there because maybe he hasn't gained the notoriety that I feel like he should have. Vadim Nemkov, and I get it. He's training at a team, Alexander Nevsky, out of Stary Oskol, with Fedor, with all sorts of really good fighters. But Vadim Nemkov's a guy that he's young in his career, 10-2, 27 years old. He fought with Ryzen, but he's got wins in his last 3 against It's Felipe Lins, who was your PFL heavyweight champ in season 1. Liam McGarry, former champ in Bellator. And Phil Davis, former champ in Bellator.
Yeah.
Pretty decent wins in his last 3 fights.
He'll break your legs with his kicks. As we saw in the Liam McGarry fight. Liam McGarry, A, just doesn't know how to check a leg kick, and it's quite frustrating. And B, he tore that thing up. Vadim Nemkov's not just a guy you have to watch out prospect-wise. Like, if you beat Phil Davis, you're doing something right. Phil Davis fought Ryan Bader to 2 split decisions. And yes, that fight was close. I did think Nemkov won. So it just kind of tells you, the ceiling that this guy has. He could be your champion within the next year and a half in Bellator.
Yeah, like, this is one of those guys, and it sucks, too, because 1 fight in 2017, 1 in 2018, 2 in 2018. We haven't seen him yet in 2019. But he's going to be taking on Rafael Carvalho in a week. And Carvalho, another former champ, albeit at 185, but he was a long-time champ. So these are big fights. And Vadim Nemkov, you go through even those losses, guys like Yuri Prohaska, your champ over in Ryzen, that guy's a stud.
He's very, very good.
And Carl Albrechtsen has a lot of experience as well. So, yeah, those are losses that, they're on his record, whatever. But
if
this
anything,
guy,
they've made him better.
Yeah, this guy has a super, super ceiling. Our other fighter at 205, and listen, we're talking a lot of movers and shakers, but a guy in Alexander Rakic, I mean, you can't leave him off the list because he's kind of like that scraggler in the bunch of 205ers. One more win, he's taking on Volkan Oezdemir.
Such a fun fight.
The prospect status goes out the door if he wins that
He's
fight.
kind of the dark horse to be the guy to beat John Jones, because that's very much the talk nowadays. It's, okay, John Jones has beaten everyone. Who's kind of this next up-and-comer? It wasn't Anthony Smith. It was Thiago Santos. He won that fight. It could be guys like Dominic Reyes, but Alexander Rakic definitely has the best chance, I think at least. If you look at his wrestling, his athleticism, his cardio, and his striking, he just puts everything together so well, and he fights like a guy who's had much more experience than he already has.
Yeah, so that rounds out the men's light heavyweight division, rather. And if we move up, we've got 1 division left. There's 2 fighters on our list, and one of those guys we're cherry picking for 2 reasons. First reason, it was the first fight on the main card, and it popped off here on YouTube. The second reason, from personal experience, just actually watching him live fight, is Yorgan De Castro. Listen, the guy doesn't have a lot of pro fights. He's 6-0 now, and he's 32 years old. But the guy hits like a damn, I don't know.
He did the Allen Iverson walkover, and for that, I'm always going to be your fan.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. I mean, a special moment after he got the win. He was on his knees, John Anik interviewing him.
He got a bonus, too.
Yeah, and the guy's Twitter following doubled overnight. So, good for Yorgan De Castro. He's one of those guys that you should definitely watch. And if you've got power and you can kind of weather a bit of a storm and unload and shoot and get a win like that, I mean, Mark Hunt was famous for it and fought into his 40s. So why can't Yorgan De Castro?
And he's surprisingly athletic. Like, he's one of these guys you look at and you're like, really? He's a fighter? But when you watch him fight, his hand speed, his power, his technique, he is one, he's a guy just to watch out for. He's an up-and-comer. And heavyweight's not that... it's not that great of a division right now. So if he can string together 2 or 3 wins, he's automatically in the top 15.
And I mean, he did apologize for being a little bit chubby, but that really doesn't matter. And a guy at heavyweight that is not a little bit chubby.
He trained with Francis.
Cyril Gane. Listen, we told you before Cyril Gane's fight with Rafael Pessoa that this guy was going to mess stuff up. And he started off slow.
He did.
He started off slow. He wasn't power punching. He kind of weathered the storm. Pessoa, who had a really decent reach, and the way that Pessoa was going to win was going to be by knockout. Cyril Gane all of a sudden gets the fight to the ground and triangle chokes him, and this is a guy that was knocking people the F out in TKO, and we can talk to it kind of from a regional perspective. I mean, Quebec, the province next to us in New Brunswick in Canada, they've got a fight card this week, but Cyril Gane knocked out Adam Dyksa. Adam Dyksa, if it wasn't Cyril Gane, it was Adam Dyksa. Adam Dyksa was supposed to be that heavyweight prospect that was going to just get launched right into the UFC. Everybody was going to know about him. Power puncher, really good fighter, really good cardio, good footwork, whatever. And Cyril Gane knocked him out in the second round.
He came and he said...
Adam Dykes' career hasn't really been the same, and he's been getting into boxing lately, so hasn't been going well for him. But Matt, Cyril Gane, I mean, I know you're high on him. I am too. I think there's a lot of reasons why he's such a good prospect at heavyweight. Not just the power, the ability to wait for his shot, shoot it, and then get a submission like that.
Well, that's the thing, and he's what you want a heavyweight fighter to look like. You know what I mean? Like, when you have, like, heroes growing up, you think, oh, Francis Ngannou. you think Cyril Gane as well. Like, he's built out of stone. He can choke you out or knock you out. It's a very intimidating guy to go up against. And hopefully he can stay active. He just fought not that long ago. He has a fight coming up here relatively soon. Hopefully he's one of these guys at heavyweight who he can string together 3 or 4 wins, maybe in 1 year. And then, we can really talk about him in that top 10 category.
It's neat because, I mean, yeah, like you think of those prototypical heavyweight fighters when you were getting right into the division. Yeah, Uberine, Brock Lesnar, Randy Couture.
Mirko Cro Cop.
Randy Couture, if you're a middle-aged man, you want to look like Randy Couture. But still, there's fighters like that. And it was interesting that you made the comparison to Francis Ngannou, because these guys are training partners at the MMA factory in France. So it would be awesome if we could get a French MMA card, get these guys on it, bring back Tom Duquesne while out of retirement.
I don't think that's going to happen.
Volkan Oezdemir could fight there, being French from Switzerland. All sorts of great fighters coming from that region of the world. But Matt, I think we pretty much covered it. We went through all the men's divisions. We will go through the women's divisions too. We're going to toss some names out there on Twitter, try and get some people involved, see what people are thinking in the 4 divisions that we have in the UFC. If you're a big atomweight MMA fan, throw us a comment underneath.
Exactly.
Let us know some of these women's atomweights that are out there that we should be paying attention to. Of course, in Southeast Asia, whether it's Road FC, One Championship, Ryzen, if it's Invicta, there's all sorts of great women's atomweights out there. You have tournaments, decently.
Yeah, but okay, here's my problem. Invicta, I don't know if you're watching. I don't know if anyone who works at Invicta is watching, but I'm talking to you directly, just like I was talking to Lorenz Larkin. If you do a tournament, don't make the fights 1 round and then count those on the professional records. It doesn't make any sense. Kylan Curran's professional record should be about 3-10, but she won a couple of 1-round fights and they count on her record, and it makes no sense whatsoever. If you're going to do a tournament, either do the Bellator route, in which you space it out over a year, or you do it all in one night. Pick your poison.
Or you do the PFL because they're interesting and they're fun. But Matt, we went through it. Hopefully that answered the question. These are some of those prospects that we think could go on to become possible champions in their organizations, or flip-flop between organizations and become champions. Ending it with Cyril Gane. I think he's got a legit shot. UFC heavyweight division. This guy could climb up the rankings. And if he were to fight anybody in the top 10, he'd give them a hell of a fight.
Well, let's calm down for right now. But
I'm looking forward to it. Round number 1, Matt. So now let's go into what is my favorite segment of the show.
It's a Twitter purge.
Let's get into the Twitter purge.
It's time for the Twitter purge.
All right, Matt, it is time for the Twitter purge. And listen, so far this week, not a whole lot of news. I mean, we kind of got a little bit of a hangover from UFC 243, and also, like we said from the start of the show, all sorts of different fight cards this week. But a little bit of news that's come out is the fact that one of the fighters that I talked about from the start of the show is possibly being a superstar for the UFC, and Zhang Weili denied an American visa.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
That's not a good way to start that tenure. And listen, we talked about it too. I mean, yeah, she's one of those stars that you can market to a huge audience in China, becoming a champion in China, the Performance Institute in Shanghai. But that's tough because if you want to have a worldwide type of crossover, a fight in the United States probably makes a lot of sense. This is tough to hear.
Well, exactly. And I mean, we saw this for a long time with Maribek Tyson Mob, how he kept on trying to get his visa, couldn't. And then it really hurts just the champion, in this case, his ability to be active, because now you almost have to, you have to schedule a whole event around them and their availability. So really, unfortunately, hopefully they can kind of resolve these issues, because like you said, the sky's the limit for her. An amazingly fun style to watch. She's a knockout artist. She's really good on the ground. Extremely well-rounded, and one of the more exciting fighters at that strawweight division.
Yeah, especially. So it's definitely tough to hear, and if we move forward with it, another little bit of news, and this doesn't really have a ton to do with MMA, except for the fact that we had a weird crossover this week.
We really did.
We had a weird crossover in the fact that WWE, so they moved their NXT developmental show to the USA Network, which is big news. They've been on USA before. They used to have a Saturday morning program on there. But then they also moved their main shows over to Fox, which was really big. And for their Fox debut, Cain Velasquez took on Brock Lesnar after a fight for a belt in the after portion of the show. And so they had Rey Mysterio come out with Rey Mysterio's music, but then Cain Velasquez came out, and that was kind of his introduction to wrestling fans. Major pro wrestling fans, because he was already doing the Lucha Libre scene. It's a big deal for MMA fans. I just feel like they missed an opportunity because they're trying to build off Rey Mysterio when Cain Velasquez is already starting his own rate that maybe major pro wrestling fans might not know.
Well, I just feel like this is more relevant to MMA due to the fact that Cain Velasquez is withdrawing from the USADA program to pursue a career in professional wrestling. And that doesn't mean that Cain's going to get on the WWE gear, but he probably will. It just more means that if he does want to have a comeback, there's going to be at least a 6-month period where he's going to have to re-enter the testing pool so that he can compete again. So we're probably not going to see Cain around ever. And if so, it won't be for years to come.
And I mean, he is 37 years old. You saw it at that SmackDown show. It was a big deal because you had titles on the line. You had Tyson Fury, which you see in this tweet from Mark Raimondi. There's going to be a special announcement with him on Friday. You saw Tyson Fury come out of the crowd and about 20 people hold him back from Braun Strowman. So now there's a big announcement.
Tyson Fury in that fight.
Yeah, I do too. But yeah, a lot of stuff going on. Professional wrestling is it's a renaissance for pro wrestling.
I couldn't care less about it, unfortunately.
It's booming, and we're talking about it. And if we move forward, a bit of a sad topic, and a guy that we kind of followed as a pro MMA fighter in William Joplin, unfortunately passed away. He had a prolonged bout with cancer. We saw him fight, somewhat recently with Bellator. He took on Warner Gillette on short notice, and yeah, it was a tough fight to watch, and just kind of a shame to hear that as well. So we just want to send out condolences to his family, and a guy that's definitely going to be missed in the MMA community. You hate to see something like that happen, especially to a younger guy. So condolences are there. If we move forward, another little bit of news. Cody Garbrandt, according to Brett Okamoto, and this one just kind of breaking somewhat lately, says he's going to work with Mark Henry ahead of his next fight. We don't have a next fight. We don't have a date yet. Still going to work with Team Alpha Male, but he's going to add Mark Henry as a striking coach in New Jersey.
Remember that time he talked all that shit about how TJ went to go train with someone else's head coach, and then he kind of slowly phased Team Alpha Male out of his life? Does this not sound exactly like what Cody Garbrandt's doing right now? I mean, Team Alpha Male is not the most relevant gym currently. Cody Garbrandt's been knocked out in his last 3 fights. Uriah Faber picked up a good win, but I mean, that was a while ago, and most people kind of forget about that. So it's probably not the worst idea for him to go out and try to pursue different training angles, especially if it's not working anymore. Of course, he's a phenomenal fighter, and he could get back into that championship discussion, but he needs more wins, and he kind of needs to do something different.
This is an opportunity where he can try and duck a Frankie Edgar fight at 135.
That's true.
I mean, both having the same coach.
But also, the thing that Cody Garbrandt doesn't have is striking defense, and well, he has footwork offensively, but defensively, it's kind of not there. Mark Henry's the perfect guy for that.
Exactly.
So it should be a good fit. Hopefully, he does kind of find what he's looking for there.
It makes a lot of sense. Normally, we go quite a bit longer with the Twitter purge, but just due to the fact that it's a shorter news week, our last bit of news, and if you've paid attention to Fight Night Picks, maybe you're new to it, from the outset, very pro bare knuckle. Very pro bare knuckle.
I'm going to say it
hosted a daily radio show for an hour every day from the summer of last year up until the end of December. And we had to do these micro events. So one of the micro events that we did on Friday, a full day of a show, we talked about bare knuckle.
How'd that go?
It was after the first. It went really well. But the fact was, it was right after the first bare knuckle, gearing up for the second one. It was still fresh in everybody's minds. You had WBKFF that was going to pop off. A lot of people were excited, and major organizations were covering it. And we were excited. We had Tony Lopez, Christina Marsh, Jeff Houston on the show. It was actually a lot of fun. But moving forward, bare knuckle boxing has taken giant leaps forward. And personally, they've taken a big step back. And listen, it's not for me to say that some of the fighters that they've signed are over the hill or that they shouldn't compete, because it's not my job to say that a fighter shouldn't compete. That's up to the fighter. It's up to commissions. It's up to medical personnel.
But you can strongly recommend that a fighter should stop.
It's not in my power to do it, but I will say signings like Antonio Bigfoot Silva, who's way over the hill, a guy like Alexander Emelianenko that doesn't really have the best public track record, trying to build yourself off subpar MMA fighters in Artem Lobov, Jason Knight, and Paulie Malignaggi, a boxer who hadn't fought in years and years, in a pay-per-view that they fluffed the numbers, which it happens, I get it. Yeah. But now they're just grabbing anybody that they can. For their upcoming event, they're going to have meet and greets with Fabricio Verdum,
a guy who's currently on suspension for failing a drug test.
Vanderlei Silva,
an old man who shouldn't fight anymore.
No, but Vanderlei Silva, who Bellator wouldn't let fight anymore because he was having memory issues, concussion-like symptoms. They said no more for professional MMA. He's going to fight bare knuckle. But just for this, he's at the meet and greet. And Anthony Rumble Johnson, who's had different domestic issues, and he's expressed an interest in returning to MMA, and a lot of fans actually very against it. So just highlighting the fact that they announced the signing of Hector Lombard, who personally, I never miss a Hector Lombard fight, but realistically, I didn't even know the UFC let him go.
Like, they basically just said, oh, you're an Olympic judoka? Let's take that skill away from you. Bare knuckle boxing, it doesn't make sense to me, and here's why. The only people who watch it like blood. You're not seeing high-level skill. You're not seeing the best of the best fight. If you like boxing, just watch boxing. You can see the best in the world at their own craft. If you just want to see MMA fighters compete, you can watch this thing. It's called MMA. It's on almost every single weekend, either Bellator or the UFC. Bare knuckle boxing is mainly just appealing to people who want to see the blood and gore of it.
It does have a niche audience over in certain parts of Europe.
I understand
and
that.
I get that bare knuckle boxing is a tradition that goes way, way back, what have you. But
How's that
still,
fence you're sitting on, Craig?
But still, I'm way over it. I'm way over bare knuckle boxing. I mean, realistically, it's just a cash grab. They're trying to kind of.
I'll be honest, if it's around for another year, I'll be surprised. Just going off their pay-per-view numbers, it's hard to sustain something. If you're paying the guys what they're claiming they're being paid, if you're paying them at all.
You're going from a big pay-per-view model to free on YouTube as well. And listen, maybe there's a lot of sponsors on board and you can afford that luxury. But to me, it's just a little bit of a sham. I don't really like it. Listen, they signed Hector Lombard. That's fine. This is a guy that was later in his MMA career, and he probably still has some gas left in the tank, even though he had a poor gas tank in MMA.
Wow.
But still,
I doubt bare knuckle has the greatest drug testing program.
Some of the signings that they've made, I don't personally agree with. That's where we're going to leave it. With the Twitter purge, I told you, we get into some crazy topics, and we get into bare knuckle boxing. That gets everybody kind of
fired up,
razzled and frazzles. But listen, we will save the end of the show. We'll get into some fight predictions, some of the bigger fights from this weekend, including UFC Tampa, but not missing out on the One Championship, the Fight Nights Global, the PFL. So let's get into that quick and wrap up the show. All right, Matt, so like we said, we're going to get into some of the fights from this weekend, and I said it from the start, there are so many different cards, and if you're an MMA fan, yeah, maybe you only pay attention to some of the major promotions, but you definitely should check out some of the different ones that are out there. I mean, we've got Fight Nights Global, we've got PFL, One Championship, Rise, and Bellator, and the UFC this weekend, among tons of other cards. Like, I'm sure we're going to miss something here. Exactly. Somebody's going to get fired up. But if we take a look at the weekend that is, there's Fight Nights Global card. And Fight Nights Global, we've seen a lot of half-decent fighters either go over there, maybe they want to rejuvenate their career, maybe it's the end of the career. And listen, you can see it from the top in a double billing of a main event. But you got Dmitry Smolyakov taking on Hassan Yousefi.
World class.
Who's Dmitry Smolyakov?
A guy who did a bunch of drugs and lost to Greg Hardy in one of the worst UFC performances of all time. Is that accurate?
It's fairly accurate. The reason why I wanted to bring this card up, I mean, yeah, there are some decent fighters on here. Maxime Buterin is one of those guys that you should be paying attention to. I get it. He's taking on Magomed Isaev. That's only 4-2-1, but still, you're the number 33 ranked welterweight in Russia. It's probably going to translate decently into other facets of MMA. But Fight Nights Global, like I said, if you're paying attention, you get a chance to watch this card on Saturday night. It's a half decent one. Of course, the big card on the weekend, UFC on ESPN Plus 19, Joanna versus Watterson. We went over some of the bigger fights in the 2-minute predictions. The one that we didn't and we decided to skip over was a short notice edition. You get Thomas Gifford now taking on Mike Davis, no longer taking on Brock Weaver, which is kind of a shame because I really like watching Brock Weaver fight. But both these guys are coming off of losses. Thomas Gifford obviously has a lot more experience as a pro MMA fighter. Not to take anything away from Mike Davis. It's just one of those fights that for us to preview,
it's kind of hard too.
It's kind of difficult, and it's not one of those fights that's really going to move the needle in our sense, but on the UFC sense as well.
It's kind of a weird card because consistently throughout there are a lot of fun fights on it. I mean, Tim Elliott versus Vishen Figueiredo is one of the better fights that you can make in the flyweight division, with two of the more exciting guys.
I'm not a big Great White Alex Morono fan, but Max Griffin's a lot of fun to watch, and Devin Clark Ryan Span's actually a really good fight.
I really like Devin Clark.
Yeah, at 205. Andre Ewell, Marlon Chito Vera is a really fun fight. Should be a great stand-up battle. And Marvin Vittori taking on Andrew Aldierte Sanchez. That's a fun one too. Both guys kind of bring different styles in that one. So yeah, I mean, overall, if I was grading this, the prelims,
I'd say a B throughout.
Yeah, I mean, the prelims might not be better than the main card, but you can pick and choose some of these fights and move them around pretty easily.
It's always good when we have a debate about what the fight of the night could be, and there's multiple fights on this card that could easily win that.
Yeah, 100%. And I think really the one that takes the cake on the weekend, One Championship. So they got a two-parter coming up, so you can watch some of it Saturday night in North America, some of it on Sunday morning. But you look at this fight card. I mean, you got Angela Lee and Zhang Jinang, who's been a champ with one championship for a little bit. Angela Lee, really marketable type of crossover star. She was born, if I'm not mistaken, in British Columbia, raised in Hawaii, fights out of Singapore, along with her brother Christian Lee, that's also competing on one of the 2 cards for belt. So on this card, you've got Angela Lee taking on Yang Jingnang for a championship at 115. You get Demetrius Johnson and Danny Kingad, the Filipino, and that's a really fun fight for their flyweight title. I know it says 135. It's considered flyweight.
This just tells you how good of a shape MMA is kind of internationally and all over the world. Demetrius Johnson has not had an easy fight since he's gone to one championship, and he was running over everybody in the UFC other than Cejudo, of course. So it's never an easy fight for him, and it's always worth watching.
And his last opponent, Yuya Wakamatsu's on one of these cards as well.
He's a monster.
You continue going down through it. You've got the Christian Lee fight, like I said, for a title. I mean, Christian Lee's a force.
He's so good.
Like, he's had some fights. One of his fights that's a loss, he threw a guy on his head. Like, it looked like it was all fair, but they said no. Like I said, Yuya Wakamatsu taking on Daehwan Kim. I mean, this fight's really good.
Yushin Okami.
Yeah. Agilan Thani's a really good fighter for him to be taken on. I know 9-3, you look at it, you say, hey, how come? But there's a lot of good fights on this card. And then you move forward, even canceled. Kleber Quike Arabs, former KSW champ. Would have been fun to watch that one. But you look at the second card, there's a reason why this one's part 2, because there's tons of title fights here.
Yeah,
I mean, Online Songs on this card taking on Brandon Vera. You never see Brandon Vera hardly ever fighting. This one's for the 225-pound championship, which it would be their light heavyweight, if I'm not mistaken, but cruiserweight in all other senses of the word. Shinya Aoki taking on Honorio Bannerio. Bibiano Fernandez, Kevin Bellion.
So
this seems like the millionth time these guys have fought, but if you've seen any of their fights before, these guys are awesome. Bibiano Fernandez is a guy that trains out of the Northwest. Does a lot of training in British Columbia. One of those guys that you should definitely like, and he's later on in his career too. But if you can go out and try and seek out these Fernandez Bellion fights, you can find them. You can find them on One Championship's YouTube page. These guys are awesome. You've also got some kickboxing and Muay Thai on here. I mean, Giorgio Petrosian is one of the greatest kickboxers of all time. Arjan Singh Buller, who you recognize from his time in the UFC, he's on this card. Mei Yamaguchi, pioneer of women's MMA at strawweight. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Rafael Silva, you might recognize him from his time in the UFC. Lots of great fighters on this card. One championship could very well win the weekend as far as quality fights are concerned. They always put on a great show, too. Ryzen. How often do you get to see a Ryzen card? It's like once in a blue moon. Yeah. You blink and they're here. You blink and they're gone. They've got their lightweight tournament going on. Kai Asakura, Ulka Sasaki. I don't think it's a good fight for Ulka Sasaki. Kai Asakura just knocked out Kyoji Horiguchi in his last fight.
Asakura's a monster.
Yuri Prohaska is one of those guys. We talked about him earlier on in the show. I don't know why he's not in the UFC. Like, contractually,
he's gonna beat Fabio Maldonado. I can tell you that.
He's gonna beat the brakes off Fabio Maldonado.
Sad. Fabio, don't take it.
Yuri Prohaska, a really fun guy to watch. Kaita Nakamura is on the card. Recognized from his recent time in the UFC. Damian Brown, Reina Kubota, who they really trying to murder, but she's not that good. She's not that great. Johnny Case, might recognize him.
Patricky Pitbull versus Tatsuya Kawajiri is such a good fight.
Yeah, I mean, the Kawajiri fight with Patricky Pitbull, probably finished.
Pitbull should win pretty easily, but it's not an easy fight for him. Like, you think Pitbull and you're like, oh, he's probably as good as Patricio. He's not. But he still brings a lot of similar skills to the team.
Exactly. And Ryzen 19, a lot of fight. We've also got a lot of fun. You got PFL 7. It's taking place on a Friday. You know, if you paid attention to the playoffs, when it gets to this stage, you got to fight twice in one night if you get the win. Unique rule set, unique way that they go about this, but a lot of fun fights here. Kind of an unfair mismatch, but that's just the way that it plays out. With Kayla Harrison taking on Jenna Fabian on the main card, but again, have to fight twice. Sarah Kaufman, Larissa Pacheco. A lot of people would recognize Pacheco. I think the two favorites to win the women's lightweight would be Sarah Kaufman and Kayla Harrison. And I mean, Sarah Kaufman's had quite a bit of a layoff between her last fight and this one. Kayla Harrison's looking like a damn force, and maybe she could fight like a Chris Cyborg or Julia Budd. But Sarah Kaufman, it's a pretty good fight, and I'd look forward to it.
Knocked out Ray Cooper III in his last fight.
Exactly. And David Michaud's a guy that, man, like, he had a little stint in the UFC. He's been with UFC, Combate, Bellator, PFL. David Michaud is a game fighter. He's really well-rounded. And a fight with John Howard's a lot of fun.
It
John
is.
Howard's just a fun fighter
He
to
is.
watch in
He's
general.
always going to put on a good performance.
The guy that's brought it all season in the PFL, Magomed Karimov. This is a guy that, if you're not watching PFL, just try and find his fights. And he's taken on Chris Curtis, who
It's actually a fun fight.
should be in the UFC and wasn't off a Contender Series win where he spinning wheel kick knocked a guy out with spinning wheel kick. He's looked great, but you go down through this, a lot of recognizable names. Glyco Franca from his time in the UFC. Sadibou C, who, man, I thought he could get it done against Ray Cooper III. Jesse Ronson, a guy that a lot of people were thinking maybe in the UFC at some point. And Brandon Loughnane, who
Definitely should be in the UFC right now.
yeah, Dana White screwed up.
Yeah,
He says that he doesn't screw up, but he does. And then you got Bellator 230, which is an amalgamation of Italian fighters, which you've seen them do when they go to Italy, put on a lot of these guys. You don't have Carlo Pietrasoli, which I feel like you're kind of missing something here where they just recently signed him. Also, this is going to be a split MMA kickboxing card. So you got Bellator kickboxing, which I don't think really anybody watches.
No,
it's crazy
we're deep into MMA and we don't watch it.
And I'm not huge on kickboxing. We'll watch some of it, but still, you go down through this card, there are some fun fighters. Cain Moose is one of those guys that you got to watch his fights because I think this guy could, if he was marketed properly, be a superstar, like a legit superstar. He's such a good fighter. He's good on the mic after the fight. He'll call somebody out. He's a lot of fun. Ashley Reese taking on Stefano Paterno. Paterno, former Cage Warriors champ at 170. Ashley Reese is one of those prospects that you definitely have to watch. One of those good signings by Bellator. Kirill Sadelnikov coming over from Fight Nights Global. He's one of those guys that's trained with Fedor. They really tried to market him. If I'm not mistaken, he lost his last fight. But still,
Alessio Sakara, you might remember him from getting knocked out in a lot of fights.
Yeah.
Poor Alessio.
This is one of the few times that Alessio Sakara is not in the main event of one of these Italian cards. But he's still on there. He's on the main card. And then those last two fights are actually a lot of fun. Yannick Bahati is one of those guys that I've been paying attention to since EFC. He's been around, whether it's with Bama, EFC, Bellator. He's a super fun fighter to watch. He's kicked around with a lot of different organizations, but he can definitely finish a fight against Melvin Manhoef, who
we all know who he is.
He either finishes a fight or gets finished.
It's kind of
that's a Melvin Manhoef type of fight. And then Carvalho Nemkov, which we previewed earlier. But listen,
Nemkov wins.
The point of this segment, there's a lot of really high-level MMA this weekend that you should definitely check out. And maybe you're a strictly UFC fighter. Listen, that's on you. But we're going to be paying attention to a lot of different cards here.
About them.
We're going to be tweeting about them, so you can find us at Craig Allen FNP on Twitter and Instagram, at Matt Allen FNP on Twitter and Instagram. I want to thank everybody who started to tune in with Fight Night Picks.
Exactly.
Bit of a long-winded episode, but we went through every different facet and spent a lot of time on them. So let us know in the comments which parts of the show you like, which parts you don't like. Listen, we're not gonna be hurt over the criticism.
Exactly. Tell a friend.
Yeah, we got some from Lorenz Larkin, and hey, we're listening to it. So we're having a lot of fun doing it. So be sure to tune in, toss us likes and subscribes. We definitely appreciate it, and tune in for our 2-minute predictions for UFC Tampa here on YouTube, Matt. We'll see you next week.